Hey everybody, decentralized world lovers, DAO likers. This is the DAO ENVELOP Podcast. I'm your host, Eugene Crypto MC, and our goal is to explore the world of DAO, how DAO live, how they work, how to join DAO, why to create DAO, and all the stuff concerning the DAO. So stay tuned for the great content from the brilliant minds of the industry. And one of them is our guest today. Please give a warm and line welcome to Jack, the founder of Colony. And Colony is a collection of decentralized protocols and applications built on Ethereum, providing tools for a more open and meritocratic future of work. So, Jack, it's a great pleasure to have you on our podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, great to start with your story in crypto. Tell us, please, briefly, how did you get into the crypto space and how did you come up with the idea of Colony?
Sure. So before starting Colony, I was a jeweler. I used to make very high-end fine jewelry. The most well-known thing that I created was a $100 million diamond skull for an artist called Damien Hirst. I was asked to design that. From there, I went on to make other sort of similarly high-end things, often for clients in Russia. And at some point, I realized that there were a lot of challenges with the way that we worked, and I wanted to find a way to make my team operate, which was already a sort of decentralized team, but to make it operate more seamlessly, to make it self-organized, and to align all of the incentives of everybody that I worked with. Because as a distributed team, we had a lot of challenges around coordination and around having incentive alignment. So that was the original thing that I was looking to solve for. At the same time, I was getting really into Bitcoin. This was around 2012, 2013. And it occurred to me that it would be possible to have something like Bitcoin that represented the ownership of some kind of distributed or decentralized organization. And I also saw that proof of work within Bitcoin was an example of one kind of work that a protocol is able to compensate people for, but wondered whether it'd be possible to do that for arbitrary work. And that was really the sort of dawning of my thinking around Colony, and it's grown into something very much more sophisticated than those original thoughts over time.
So you are a sort of guy, I call them ideological. You are by the idea in the space, not for money. That's great. I love this.
Right. Yeah.
I love the story. So how do you explain what Colony is and what its general purposes?
So Colony is an operating system for decentralized autonomous organizations. It basically allows people to manage money and manage authority over that money. So the thinking is that why does somebody get authority to have control over the funds of an organization? And in Colony, that works by people earning reputation in it. So people get paid by the organization for doing work, just as they do in any normal company now. And in exchange for that, they get, when they get paid, they also get reputation points. And those reputation points that give them the authority to act. But reputation also decays over time. So this keeps the organization decentralized by virtue of the fact that if everybody's getting paid at the same time, and then everybody's reputation is also decaying at the same time, the amount of influence that any one person within the organization has is representative of what they've recently done. So then you can also compartmentalize your organization into different teams or projects. Each one of those can have different budgets. People can have different reputations in each one of those teams. So with we're trying to recreate all of the good things that are about companies right now, and that have served us so well as a human race, but to do so in the context of the web, which is that you don't know who anybody else is and you can't trust anybody else. So how can we create organizations that can be as scalable and as effective as traditional companies, but where you don't need to know or trust any of the people that you're working with?
Definitely. I love it. So recently you've launched a slogan, 0 to DAO in 90 seconds.
Yeah.
Explain us, please. What is it?
So it means that when you, if you want to create a DAO on Colony, it will take you 90 seconds if you know what you're doing and you're very decisive, to go from the beginning to the end of the process. So you can, second 0, have no DAO. By second 90, have a DAO that's ready to go and start incentivizing people to contribute.
Okay, so let's dive deeply into the concept of DAO, because it is a revolutionary concept comparing with traditional organizations from the 20th century. So how to define what DAO, or decentralized autonomous organization, is, and what are the common mistakes in perception or understanding DAOs?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really quite difficult question, because I don't think there is a common definition for what really a DAO is. Several years ago, Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, wrote a really excellent article called, I think it was DAOs, Do's, DACs, an incomplete terminological guide. And in that, he outlined his thoughts as to how you categorize different organizational types that are kind of within this spectrum. And in the purest sense, and actually, let me reframe that. So I think that now we've come to an understanding that DAOs can exist on a spectrum. They exist from being narrow DAOs, and I would argue that something like Bitcoin is the perfect example of a narrow DAO, in which you have got a technical arrangement which incentivizes people to do one particular form of work, which is, in this case, providing hashing power to the network. At the opposite end of the spectrum is the technology that Colony is building, which is for wide DAOs, where the work that is being done is arbitrary. So it's, generally speaking, a technological arrangement that exists to provide the incentives to enable people to do work towards some purpose.
In your recent interview in London, or not an interview, your speech at the sort of conference, you said that the phrase from Mark Andrews saying, software is eating the middle management. What does it mean, and why it is important regarding the DAO concept?
So I think that, so I had to phrase this. So the real innovation of DAOs, I think, is that they are reducing a lot of the admin that is required for an organization to operate. Rather than you needing management to enforce rules and to make sure people do what they need to do and know what they need to do, DAOs will mean that is a more self-organizing and self-enforcing system, where you don't really need the same layers of management, where you can have a flatter structure within the organization, because the authority that people have is meted out automatically by the system, rather than requiring it to be conferred upon people from the top down.
Well, now we're blowing the minds of the traditional people who were grown in the world of traditional or centralized hierarchical organizations, and they are asking us now, okay, guys, if you are eliminating the CEO and the top management, if DAO has no CEO or management at all, so how it works in general? Explain us, please.
So the way it works is actually very varied. There's no one particular model for how organizations are operating as DAOs. But this notion of number one, organizations that are DAOs being leaderless, I think is not really true. Leadership is distinct from control. All organizations do and will continue to need some form of leadership, but that is an emergent property of people doing things which people wish to follow, rather than necessarily being the fact that somebody nominates themselves or claims that they are the leader and therefore people must follow them. So it's kind of more voluntary to follow people than forced. And I think the other side of it is that that the DAOs aren't really the only time that this is happening. There's lots of other organizational forms that are existing in the world where the traditional corporate hierarchy is not the model of choice. In fact, this has been going on for a number of years, possibly decades actually, that people are understanding that the traditional corporate hierarchy is not the model that's really fit for the modern world. The corporate hierarchy is something that emerged in the sort of industrial age, where processes were complicated, companies could be large, but they were relatively predictable. Information moved slowly, decisions didn't need to happen fast. The world we live in now moves quickly. There's a great deal of uncertainty. There's a great deal of change. And organizational models where it takes a long time for information to flow up and down the corporate hierarchy and decisions to be made just no longer really work. So we're seeing lots of organization design firms and lots of new organizational methodologies which are not using any technology at all other than the ideas are emerging and being adopted by very large corporations. So there are many organizations which operate very much like DAOs. One example is a tomato firm called Morningstar. Another is a huge electronics manufacturer called Haya. But people don't consider those to be DAOs. So what I think we're just seeing is a sort of convergence of technology and organizational theory. And that is what people are starting to call DAOs.
Well, so the DAO may be considered as a sort of technological response for a drastically increased velocity of processes of information exchange in 21st century compared with 20th century, right? So another great statement you used to say in your last videos: DAO to companies are as video games to board games.
Right. Yeah.
Does it mean that DAOs are going to be sort of disruptors of traditional hierarchical organizations of the 20th century we've discussed now, or will be the future of DAO will be the future of organizations in a whole, or they will be coexisting like video games are coexisting with board games in modern times? So DAO will be coexisting with hierarchical traditional organizations.
Yeah, I'm not really trying to set those two structures up against one another. It's really more of an analogy for how rules are enforced in a traditional versus a organization versus a DAO. As I'd mentioned, these new organizational models, things like holacracy and sociocracy and various others, are becoming more widely adopted by companies. But the challenges of those organizational models is that they're quite complicated and they require an understanding of the rules by everybody who wishes to work within the organization. So in that respect, it's like a board game. You can't play the game properly unless you understand the rules. If people don't understand the rules, then it breaks the game and it's no longer fun to play and it doesn't work. The same is not really true of a board game, of a video game, sorry. In a video game, the rules are enforced by the software. So you can really only play the game according to the rules. And it's kind of similar in a DAO, that there are rules which are enforced by smart contracts. And so therefore you can only really play within the rules of the game. And if you don't play within the rules of the game, well, it's not possible to not play within the rules of the game. So that's what that analogy really means. And I think that it makes these new organizational forms far easier to work within than if you have to learn all the rules, because they're very complicated and they're very counterintuitive, and they run against the cultural expectations that we already have of what an organization is. Yeah.
You know, another great statement I'd love to mention, a statement of you from the last videos, it looks like such a warning. You said DAO is not a replacement for incorporation. What about, do you try to warn us, the community, with this statement?
No, so a DAO is not an incorporation. You can create what appears to be a company without ever incorporating the company, right? So in the UK, you'd create a limited company. It's a very easy process to do. And that provides you with a legal personality for the organization as a whole. Alternatively, you can just start working with some other people without creating any incorporation, but then you're kind of unofficially in a sort of partnership. And that means that you have joint and several liability with everybody else that you're working with. And you have the full liability. You have unlimited personal liability for everything that you do. Now, the same is really applicable, many legal scholars think, in the context of a DAO, where you don't have any incorporated entity that captures the work of the organization. You're really just using some software to coordinate and compensate the people who are contributing to it. But that has got absolutely nothing to do with any real world legal classification of what's going on. So just because you coordinate yourself and call yourself a DAO, it is not equivalent to or creating a limited company, much in the same way that just starting to do work is not equivalent to creating a limited company.
So don't forget, guys, that the DAO is just a combination of people, community, and software, which helps them to coordinate their work better, and don't confuse it with corporation. Okay, got it. So how would you describe the main problems DAOs and its founders are facing now in the end of 2021?
So I think that one of the big challenges that we're seeing for a lot of DAOs right now is there is an unclear distinction between what constitutes a community and what constitutes a DAO. And so we're seeing that a lot of communities coming together and getting relatively large, relatively quickly. I'm talking in the sort of hundreds or low thousands of people, some larger even. And then trying to get things done. And coordinating large numbers of people effectively is very difficult. And I think there's a sort of trilemma that exists between structure, speed, and scale. I don't think it's possible to get big and move fast in a structured environment. I don't think it's probably also to get big and highly structured and move fast. So there's some challenges that exist around there that I think we're seeing a lot of DAOs facing, where they've got a whole bunch of people coming together, all very excited about something, but then not really knowing how to coordinate themselves, how to get on, how to get anything delivered when so many people want to be able to contribute. But yeah, there's not a great deal necessarily that can be done by those people all at once.
Okay, a couple of questions from Vladimir Popov, aka Manoscope, the advisor of the Envelop. Do you see, asks he, any alternatives for voting and governance tokens? Because, as he explains, democracy works badly on mobile, flexible, decentralized systems. How would you answer?
Yeah, I personally think, and we as Colony think, that voting is not the ideal solution in most cases to decentralized decision making. And we further believe that governance tokens, in terms of the way decisions should be weighted, are really not appropriate in most cases either. So we've decided as a human species that we don't like to vote on everything in organizations. It's not an effective use of everybody's time. We instead imbue people with executive authority within organizations. They have a certain amount of authority to act based on their status and stature within the organization. And that's really a structure that needs to be recapitulated in the decentralized world. It's not going to be possible to have everybody vote on everything all the time. And it's especially not going to be possible to do that with tokens, because for the simple reason that you can't tokens are a fungible commodity, right? So you can't distinguish between one token and the other when those are fungible tokens, which most governance tokens are. And therefore, you can't distinguish between the holder and whether they know about design or whether they know about engineering or know about marketing. All you know is how wealthy they are. And wealth is no proxy for expertise. So we really need ways that people can make decisions without voting, and we need more effective decentralized tools to weight their influence than how wealthy they are. In Colony, we think of those as being what we call motions, where people can create what's equivalent, I suppose, to a proposal about something that should happen. They back it with stake, so they put their money where their mouth is in terms of their ownership of the organization tokens. And then as long as nobody objects to it, it will pass after a security delay. Only if people do object to it and they want to stake in opposition is it necessary to vote. And what we've seen from the DAOs running on Colony that are using this, no vote has so far been necessary. In all cases, people are already discussing what needs to be done beforehand. So when they stake their tokens, they know that it's very unlikely that there's going to ever need to be a vote on it. The second is what I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, reputation. So people earning influence within specific areas of the organization, just as you would do in any traditional company. You have your place within a team or in a department, and your influence within that department or team grows as you become more competent and have more time at the role. This is exactly the same way it operates in Colony, but it is a pure function of how much you earn in the tokens of that colony by doing work within it.
Another question from Vladimir. Why did you choose Ethereum and your C20 standard tokens for Colony, although we have a lot of developing layer one blockchains like Solana, Cardano, etc.?
Well, we got started on Colony many years ago. And back then, Ethereum was really the only choice. But if I were making the decision today, it would still be based around Ethereum and the Ethereum ecosystem, simply because the network effects are much greater there. The technology is much more mature. So whilst there are technologies out there, which I believe as a base chain is very plausible that they are more sophisticated designs, things like Polkadot and Dfinity and Solana possibly as well. None of these things have got anything like the network effect or maturity of tooling around them that Ethereum does. And so as a consequence, I think that the really only plausible deployment path for projects that want to have a ready market available to them is around the Ethereum ecosystem. Colony is not actually running on Ethereum because the gas costs obviously on there right now are too high. We run on an Ethereum sidechain called XDAI, where the gas token is DAI, so it's a stable coin, meaning that it's very predictable what the costs to run are on XDAI, which is very nice.
Okay. GG Envelop is a solution for creating a wrapped NFT, and Envelop is also the DAO consisting of the micro-DAOs, token oracle-lytics. The question arises for our community is super interesting. How DAOs may be combined with NFTs?
Mm-hmm. I think that there's a wide number of opportunities for DAOs to be combined with NFTs, or for indeed DAOs to be an emergent property of NFTs. One interesting experiment that I've seen a few projects working on is the fractionalization of NFTs. So an NFT can be minted or created or added to the particular platform, and a whole bunch of tokens emitted as a consequence, which gives some governance rights within a fairly sort of narrow rule set around what's done with that NFT. I think that's a really, really interesting opportunity. But I think more broadly that we're only scratching the surface of what's possible with NFTs. And I think we'll see them being imbued with all sorts of things like governance rights, things like them being used as credentials, which give you certain access or certain permissions to act. Yeah, I think it's an enormously, and used in combination with one another as well. I think there's enormous possibilities there. One of the things that I'm most excited and bullish about in terms of the combination of NFTs and DAOs is the prospect of them in virtual worlds. So for many years, actually, because I also founded what I think was probably the first serious attempt at a NFT project back in 2016. It was something we called Ownage, where we were really trying to create a whole framework for tokenized game assets. And we wrote a blog post way back then about what it would look like if you've got all of the different in-game assets, characters, skins, attire, resources, everything within a game was all NFTs. And different classes of player had different ability to use those different NFTs. And they were then able to collaborate together to leverage their combined talents in guilds within those games, and those guilds are DAOs. And then you have all the commerce that's available there. And when you combine that with the very sophisticated financial tools that now exist around DeFi, there is opportunity for a really sophisticated business economy that exists entirely within virtual worlds, that's every bit as robust and valuable as those that exist in the real world. And I think we'll see that really blossom within the next decade, if not less.
Yeah, it's totally agree with you. Excellent thinking. So as we do understand, regarding DAOs, we have two general alternative ways of living in the world of DAOs. The first is to create a DAO by ourselves, or the second is to join some other DAO alike. I'd love you to ask about all these alternatives. The first, why should one create a DAO for his purposes, and how to do it step by step, core steps, not detail, but core steps.
All right. So, I mean, the reason to create a DAO versus to start working within a DAO is really similar to why create a startup versus go and join a startup. I think that most people who start startups, and this will be true of DAOs as well, is that they're just driven to do it. They have got something that they want to see manifested in the world, and they have got a vision and they want to execute on that vision. Not everybody either has the desire or confidence or vision to create a new entity themselves. Therefore, it's more appropriate and desirable for them to go and join one and contribute their valuable skills to somebody else's vision, which perhaps aligns with their own thinking. So, yeah, I think it really comes down to your internal motivators. I think it's more of a psychological question than a practical one. But then how you go about starting a DAO is, I think, a question that has probably a lot of different answers depending on context. But I think the most common path that we're seeing happen right now is that somebody has got an idea for something that they think their DAO would do. They start putting together some information to communicate what their idea is, and then they're creating Discord communities around those ideas, starting to talk to people in different communities about their ideas and inviting them to their Discord community. So it would seem that most DAOs are starting off as these Discord communities to begin with. And then as their needs grow they start adding on tools. So it really just starts with Discord and maybe like a Notion as like the knowledge base. Then as more work gets done and more discussions take place, that knowledge base on Notion gets grown. Then as people really start to contribute effort towards it, it becomes necessary to start accounting for the work that people are doing. It's really not necessary at the start. It's a bit too much effort at the start because you're just fueled by the excitement around the idea. But at some point, it starts to get serious and you think, okay, we need to calculate how much people are contributing and how much that value they should be getting out of it. And that's when you start to need a tool like Colony to create a token and to start allocating tokens to people. Even before that, to be honest, it might be sufficient just to be keeping notes of things in a spreadsheet. But at some point, you're going to want to reconcile this to something that is immutable. And therefore, that's the point at which you should start to use a DAO framework like Colony.
Okay, so the second alternative, if we don't need to create a DAO, we may join a DAO. Why should one consider joining any DAO, Alex, and how to do that step by step?
Yeah, so I think that obviously we have lots of people in the world are freelance. Lots of people prefer not to work for a single employer. And I think one of the great challenges around being freelance is that you are reliant on getting clients that are going to want to pay you for the work. And then you have a fairly mercenary relationship with those clients. They pay you for a number of hours or a piece of work, and you're always really tied to how many hours you can work and what the client is going to ask of you. I think in DAOs, there's an opportunity for freelancers to have greater choice in exactly who they want to be contributing their effort to, and then also getting to own a share of the value that they're creating rather than only getting paid for the hours that they work. And I think then we sort of transition from being people who are only paid to people who are also equity owners. I mean equity in terms of it being a more equitable outcome rather than really representing the equity of the company. But yeah, I think that idea of ownership over the fruits of your labors is really the key driver.
Excellent. The fruits of your labor is the key driver. Great phrase. You are the great creator of the great phrases. Made a quotation. So another couple of questions from Vladimir Popov, the advisor of Envelop, about reputation. You've already
yes.
Told. What is the role of a reputation in Colony, which is such of reward besides tokens? How this reputation in Colony differs from a typical rating system?
So reputation in Colony is an attribute which is consensus relevant, by which we mean it's something that exists on chain and it is used to weight how much influence you have in an organization. You earn that reputation by getting paid by that organization in its native token in the specific areas of the organization that you work in. So let's say there's an Envelop DAO that's running on Colony, and there's therefore is there a token that's associated with Envelop?
Yeah, the token is called NIFTSY. Yes, Envelop is a sort of super-DAO. This is a couple of micro-DAOs, and we have token named NIFTSY, right?
NIFTSY. Okay, so when let's say you've got 3 teams within this DAO, you've got the design team, the engineering team, and the marketing team. when somebody gets paid in NIFTSY for doing some engineering work, they earn some reputation in the engineering team. That gives them influence over decisions that take place within the engineering team. But because they haven't been paid for having done any work in the design team or the marketing team, they don't have any influence in those teams. So that's really how reputation works. It's an attribute that's associated with your account when you get paid in your organization's native token.
Okay. We don't like the word competitors because the crypto industry is still in its infancy, and we are sort of co-creators. We're competitors by design. So how do you see the Colony competitors, who they are, and why Colony is better than they?
So who are Colony's competitors? Well, I think it's an interesting space that we find ourselves in terms of that idea of competition versus collaboration versus co-creation, because as you say, when a whole space is so nascent, there's not really competition over a finite amount of market share. You all need one another to create the market, and if there's only one entity within it, then it's very unlikely that the market is going to be created. So I am very pleased to see the blossoming of competition within the DAO space, because it really means that there is a market there which is growing very rapidly. So who are the competition? I think there are tons of them, and they're all sort of targeting slightly different subsets. I think where Colony's strength lies is that we've been thinking about this since 2014, and there's a lot of people who are just starting to think about it in 2021. So we've got 7 years of head start on everybody in terms of thinking, and actually also in terms of development, because we've already built a very large, very powerful, very sophisticated tool set that covers a very broad range of the things that it will be necessary for a DAO to do. And so I think that's really our great strength. But I think that our weakness, or the opportunity that exists out there for others, is that the great strength of operating within Ethereum ecosystem in particular is the enormous composability of the different components within of different tools. So it's very possible that people will be able to piece together very flexible tool sets that very narrowly meet their needs by combining any of these smaller components, rather than just using a more holistic framework like Colony. But the strength of Colony is that makes it very easy. Whereas if you want to spin up a Colony, as I said, it will take 90 seconds, if not less. I've done it in, I think 73 is my fastest time. If you wanted to combine like creating a Gnosis safe, then issuing a token, and then adding some voting tools onto it, and a bunch of other stuff that you're going to end up needing in order to effectively track contributors, it's going to be quite complicated, and it's going to take quite a long time to do. So it's all a question of flexibility versus ease of use.
Yeah, I love the answer. So another question about competition, and now I'm in the competition of DAOs with traditional organizations as employers. It seems to me that DAO will become in 10 years the correct employers, and maybe they will overcompete the traditional organizations in employing staff. Do you agree on that?
I think it's very possible. Yeah, I think that I don't necessarily see it as a sort of zero-sum competition that exists with traditional companies. I think that there are contexts in which DAOs make sense and contexts in which they don't. And I think that it will become apparent what those contexts are over time. But I absolutely believe that we will see DAOs emerge that are enormously valuable players in the world economy in the next decade. Absolutely certain of that. In fact, I already think we are, because I think that you can see the whole ecosystem as a form of DAO in a way. Like if you were to think of the ecosystem that exists around any layer one chain, taking Ethereum as the easiest example, there is an underlying token of value which is incentivizing people to engage in a broad range of activity that ultimately contributes towards the appreciation of value of the underlying asset. So I think the fact that something like the Ethereum community is not centrally coordinated makes it harder for people to really see the activity within that ecosystem as constituting a DAO. But I think that it will become more apparent over time that that is really what DAOs end up looking like. A lot of discoordinated activity that ultimately is all beneficial to the underlying principles of the organization or protocol that it relies upon.
Yeah, I love your answer. Absolutely agree with you. So a couple final questions. Thanks God and to internet, we got a lot of learning resources about crypto, decentralized world, and so on and so forth. What learning resources about DAO you personally use? I mean, specific books, podcasts, blogs, etc., etc.
Well, we have our own podcast that
Collectively Intelligent.
That's right. Yeah.
Suggest your listeners to subscribe. That's excellent podcast. I love it.
Thank you. Where we go pretty deep on a lot of questions around decentralized governance and blockchain technology generally. Within our Discord community as well, which you can access via our website at colony.io, we have a channel called DAO News, where every day we've got members of the team who are sort of scraping the web for the new news about DAOs and publishing it there. So there's just daily fresh reads. Honestly, there's so much content that is being produced out there every day now that it's very hard to keep up. And it reminds me of very much of the early days of Ethereum, when there was a time where I knew everything that was going on and I could keep track of all of the different projects and knew all of the different people. And then there was a moment at which I realized that everything was expanding in all directions faster than I could understand, let alone keep track of. And we're just getting to that point with DAOs as well, where that's true.
Yeah. Is Colony hiring staff? And if yes, whom do you need most?
Yeah, we are. Absolutely. We're looking for DevOps people. We're looking for front-end developers. We're looking for biz dev people and communications. So we have a variety of roles that we're looking to fill at the moment at Colony.
And finally, Jack, what's the best way to follow you on the internet and meet offline if somebody from our listeners are in London?
Well, it's very easy to get in touch with me over our Discord community, which again, you can find by going to colony.io. I'm always in Discord, or on Twitter at Jack DeRose.
So thank you very much, Jack. It's been extremely educational, extremely immersive podcast about DAO world. I've learned a lot, which I never learned from reading and listening a lot of content, but thanks God, a lot of content. We have another content in the way of DAO ENVELOP Podcast. It's been born now. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. You were listening and watching the DAO ENVELOP Podcast. It's the podcast that we're about DAO. So please subscribe, like, share. Don't forget to hit the bell button for not missing the future episodes of our podcast. Thank you very much. Jack, Curiosity founder. of the colony and Eugene Crypto MC over with you. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for next episodes. Bye-bye.